Reality, Karma, and Nonduality by Rebecca French. Chapter 4 in The Golden Yoke. A man is walking a narrow path in a sun-dappled forest. Before him on the path, amid the leaves and streaks of light, he suddenly sees a very large coiled snake. Shocked and afraid, he noiselessly turns to hide behind a tree and waits, anxiously aware of the great danger. In time, he ventures a look around the tree once more and refocuses his eyes. He focuses again. Then he comes back to the path and stares down at the snake. He sees that it is not a snake, but a heavy, coiled rope in front of him. With a wave of relief, he bends down to pick it up and finds that the rope, worn with age, disintegrates in his hands into tiny strands of hemp. Tibetan Buddhist parable. Among the basic Tibetan concepts that affect the law are those of reality and illusion, the role of karma and the nature of rebirth, radical particularity and non-duality. These concepts are interrelated. Each builds upon and is structured by the others. For example, the tripartite nature of Buddhist reality is related to the level of afflictions of the individual perceiver, and these afflictions are affected by the cyclical path of karma. Similarly, the awareness of the illusory nature of the world leads one to see interrelatedness rather than opposition. The role of these basic ideas in the legal system of Tibet is illustrated in the case of the wandering monk. The illusory nature of reality. For the Tibetan Buddhist, the parable in this chapter's epigraph demonstrates an essential core truth of this life. Everything we apprehend in the world is mere illusion. Like a delicious meal conjured up by a magician, our present observed reality is entirely an illusory feast. It has no substance. Appearances, or mental obscurations as Tibetans call them, occur around us because we do not yet have the ability to see their insubstantiality. Because of our ignorance and grasping attitudes, we can see only the illusion. The parable's images of the snake, the rope, and the hemp represent the three levels of reality available to a sentient being in this world. The first is an illusion that the man took to be real and responded to emotionally and physically. The snake is the level of appearance, the imagined aspect of reality, kuntagpe, in Tibetan. The second level, represented by the coiled rope, is the functional or relative aspect of reality, shengiwang. Finally, the tiny strands of hemp are the perfected aspect of reality, the essence of the composition of what lay before the man on the path, yongsu dupa. To see the snake, therefore, is to see an illusion. A person who cannot see the hemp does not see the world as it truly is, in its perfected aspect. In Buddhist belief, we suffer from attributing significance to the dreamlike appearances resulting from the preconceived notions and categories that we carry with us and constantly use to interpret the world. These categories of data, acquired through our senses, keep us ignorant of the true nature of reality. A Buddha, seeing the world as it actually is, sits down at the magician's table but finds no meal before him, walks down the path but finds no snake before him, only tiny strands of hemp. This notion of illusion is of profound importance in comprehending the Tibetan view of reality, including legal reality. These realities are states of awareness for individual minds. In essence, what we see and experience daily is only one type of is, the type of is our minds are capable of perceiving. Even though Tibetan judges and petitioners often commented that they could deal with a legal problem only in terms of a this-worldly or apparent reality, at the same time there was a general recognition that this-worldly facts were not ultimate or perfected facts. Disputes were engendered by mental afflictions that hinder one from understanding the perfected aspect of the world. Any dispute was therefore comprehensible in an entirely different way by one with a more relative or a perfected vision, one not afflicted by certain mental contaminations. It was not an uncommon move in a dispute to make reference to another frame of reality in which the same circumstances could be understood differently. The old man's argument, "You may think I am just a common beggar, but how do you know I am not an enlightened saint?" Chapter 18, immediately shifted his beating of a small child from the this-worldly reality frame of child abuse to the perfected vision of an enlightened being helping a child to burn off bad karma from a previous life. Mitigation of punishment, too, was commonly argued with otherworldly reasoning. Tibetans accept the presence of several simultaneously operating levels of reality, each giving clues to the next, each crafted of a degree of deceptive illusion except the last, each coexisting with the other in a non-nirvanic space. If all a person knows of the world, legal or otherwise, is illusion, one must attempt to operate within these limitations as a legal actor with the knowledge that there are other levels of Buddhist reality. As Clifford Geertz puts it, the movement back and forth between the religious perspective and the common sense perspective is actually one of the more obvious empirical occurrences on the social scene. human beings move more or less easily, and very frequently, between radically contrasting ways of looking at the world, ways which are not continuous with one another but separated by cultural gaps across which Kierkegaardian leaps must be made in both directions. In Buddhism, an individual experiences rebirth into this world and begins the volitional production of both good and bad karma, or lei, which will determine his or her future rebirth and chances for enlightenment. Avoiding wrong action, seeing the world without mental afflictions, and taking part in religious activities produce good karma in this life. At death, the individual goes into an intermediate state and then is reborn into one of 6 realms. Every human has had countless previous lives and will have innumerable future lives, unless enlightenment is achieved. This is the cyclical nature of rebirth, a chain of lives connecting past, present, and future. Thinking about their own and others' past and future lives comes very naturally to Tibetans. Examples of this point of view abound in conversations. One Tibetan will tell you that the incarnation of his grandfather, who was a lama and is now a 19-year-old boy, is coming to visit him to ask for advice. An elderly Tibetan will say that he is going home to do his mantras so that he will be reborn in America. A third will talk about the future low rebirth of a man who is a known thief. Tibetan law, both philosophically and cosmologically, is situated in a present that expands into otherworldly realms of the past and the future. Since every act done by anyone at any time is the result of both previous karma and the present possible exercise of will, a crime could have its cause in a previous life, its commission in this life, and its punishment in a future life, in a lower or more difficult rebirth. In the refugee community in India, for example, when one Tibetan child made strange noises and threw a picture of the Dalai Lama on the ground, her behavior was taken as an indicator that she had been a dog in her previous life and would be reborn in a hell realm. A parable told by a Tibetan official illustrates the same idea. The throne holder of Ganden Monastery was from Kham, and he was once asked by a layman, "Holiest one, why are all Westerners so very clever?" Then the monk said, "Why do you think that they are clever?" And the man replied, "Holiest one, they have so many things." So the throne holder of Ganden replied, "Westerners are not clever at all. They are fools because they engage their entire lives in working very hard to make things now for themselves. What they produce is only for this life. What we produce is for the next life, which is much more important." The impact of these views on the legal system was significant. In any dispute settlement proceeding, a good petitioner or witness was expected to be aware of future lives and their importance. Tibetans told stories of conciliators and judges asking parties about this directly, for such awareness indicated religious and moral depth. Judges were expected to consider the past and future lives of defendants when assigning penalties. Although self-responsibility for acts and choices in this life is an essential aspect of Buddhism, there is also a recognition that karma can dictate present circumstances. Thus, Tibetans would often comment that one did not always know the reasons for particular legal circumstances, because these were rooted in a past life. And if no punishment was forthcoming for a crime in this lifetime, the presumed repercussions of future karma served as a rationalization. Cycling in and out of lives with not just one but infinite chances for enlightenment reduced the impact of death, but increased the possibility of perpetual suffering. A meritorious life now would result in less suffering the next time around. An unmeritorious life now would result in more suffering, possibly even a rebirth in a vividly depicted hell realm. There are many stories of robbers and other criminals who, coming to the realization that they were destined for a future life of torture, converted and became religious mendicants. Radical particularity and non-duality. The Tibetan worldview is radically particularistic. This means that it focuses on the small component parts as ultimately real rather than the larger entity, the pieces of hemp rather than the snake. Persons are made up of infinitesimal units which are themselves in constant flux, much like the tiny strands of hemp. At its most essential, everything is in constant movement, changing its composition continuously, never stable, combining and recombining into the various accumulations that we mistake for permanent objects and individuals. Rebirth is the total recombination of millions of these units and karmic seeds. One consequence of this view is that no self exists in any deep sense in Buddhist philosophy, no ego or actor, no constant or permanent individuality. Tibetans believe that it is one of our common illusions to see human beings as having permanence, when they are merely combinations of tiny elements. In law, however, these notions of radical particularity rarely surfaced as a part of the legal commentary, except perhaps in recitations of religious verse. Non-duality, one result of radical pluralism in the Buddhist worldview, is difficult for Americans to grasp. Non-duality eliminates binary opposition, a cornerstone of Western thought in both everyday and scholarly reasoning. At this most fundamental level, two orders of truth, absolute and relative, two types of worlds, supramundane and mundane, two phenomenal levels, nirvana and samsara, do not make sense within the non-dualist bounds of Buddhist philosophy. There is no actual duality of subject and object, no independent existence of anything anywhere at any moment. Any duality is an illusion. Terms that present dualistic oppositions are used for explanatory purposes only. An enlightened being in Buddhism, a Buddha without mental afflictions, is not subject to the duality viewpoint of lower states of consciousness, does not see subject and object, existence and non-existence. All Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and deities with this higher consciousness also realize that they are one and the same. Everything is composed of the same small parts, which are constantly realigning, forming new identities and entities. Thus, real wisdom in Tibetan Buddhist philosophy consists of comprehending the radical particularity of all existence, the non-substantiality of things, and the ultimate union and interrelatedness of all persons and things. Lay Tibetans and most Tibetan nuns and monks understand basic conceptions such as radical particularity and non-duality as a sort of story about the constitution and composition of the world. These ideas perfuse Tibetan thought and discourse. They are reiterated in liturgy, incorporated into proverbs, employed as idioms and jokes, used as rationalizations, explanations, and morals. Although apparently contradictory and difficult for the non-Tibetan to comprehend, they form the background for all Tibetan jurisprudential concepts and legal rituals. The case of the wandering monk. How did notions of reality and illusion, karma and rebirth, radical particularity and non-duality operate in the legal system of Buddhist Tibet? Listen to the following narrative of a case that came before a local headman from the area of Sakya in the 1940s. There was a headman of a region named Tseten, which had a well-known monastery. One of the monks in that monastery, when his teacher died, began to leave the monastery and wander about the countryside. That monk often left during the day, and at night he came back to the monastery to steal food from the private rooms of the other monks. There were many complaints about this monk, and so a case was brought to the headman of the area by the complainants who had been burglarized. Finally, the monk was caught and whipped and put in a jail cell in the main town of the area. The headman went to offer him food. Then, this first time, the monk returned the stolen articles and had another man pledge as a guarantor that he would not do it again, and he was freed. But the monk continued to wander, and he returned many times to prison after this for stealing offenses. One time he escaped and went a long way away to Tsong Topgyal, another time to the city of Gyantse, another time to Penam. He escaped several times when the jailers or guards slept and was recaptured. The first several times he was not chained in any way, and so he escaped easily. Then they put iron fetters on his legs during the night. These are the same fetters that we use on horses in the summer by putting the front and back leg together. No one knew how he escaped with the fetters on, but he did. The punishments of whipping and prison had no effect at all on him. So the headman from that area had real pity for this monk because he was like an animal. Again, the headman had to make a decision about the wandering monk who had stolen once more, but the decision was hard for him. So the headman asked an old jailer in the prison to speak to the monk. He told him to ask the monk why he stole and how to keep him from stealing in the future. And so the monk told the jailer why he stole. He said that he was used to enjoying all the foods in all the monasteries and families that he visited, but after a little while they kicked him out. Then he didn't know how to get more food, and so he stole. After this investigation into the reasons why the monk stole, the headman asked others to see if what he had said was true. People said what he had said was true, and the wandering monk had never killed or stabbed anyone. When the headman was told these reasons, he made up a new program for the wandering monk. He decided to send him home and told his father to take his son back and give him food and work to do. But his family came to see the headman and said that they didn't want the monk because it would create a bad name for their household. And so the headman had to think again, for this was a very big problem. Finally, the headman went to see the monk. He told him that if he kept stealing, no one would like him or even want to see him. He said that he was creating very bad karma, and this karma would cause a bad rebirth. Then the headman told the monk that he was to stay in the headman's house from now on. Since he had a big family, there was enough food, and the monk was to have food, clothes, and a salary. The headman said that he hoped the monk would do this and remain good. If he didn't, both the headman and the monk were in serious trouble because many people were very upset. And so the wandering monk came to live with the headman. He changed greatly then, and all the people were very surprised. Because he was a healthy monk and good at working, he was put in charge of all the cattle, yaks, and goats of the family. The monk stayed with the family and never stole again. In time, the wandering monk became so trusted in the area that during the irrigation supply time, when water was distributed, he was asked to be the one to decide which farmer should receive the water first. At the core of this legal case are the underlying notions of karma, radical particularity, and illusion. All the Tibetan participants considered the previous life of this monk and reasoned that he was acting like an animal because he perhaps was an animal in a previous life. The story even hints that the monk was in some way a different sort of being, since he could get out of leg fetters, escape prison, and remain unaffected by whipping. His current self was not a constant. He was obviously afflicted with several mental obscurations that caused his actions. The headman reasoned that the monk was not motivated to commit crimes. Instead, raised in a communal environment, he had a view of the world which did not privatize food. The headman did not deal with this case from a dualistic perspective of right or wrong, guilt or innocence, correct or incorrect rule application. Instead, with a keen awareness of the monk's nature and future life, he moved beyond determination of guilt to investigate the unique causes and circumstances of the case, reveal the illusory nature of the crime, and fashion a unique solution. Such a result is particularist and does not produce a general rule. In the words of one Tibetan commentator, it was as if the headman could look past the snake-like illusion of the crime to the rope-like relative reality of the monk's nature.